All right, so it's 2 past, so we're gonna get started here. Thanks everyone for joining us and for taking time out. I know there's a lot going on now, so hopefully this is a pleasant distraction and something fun. We're certainly really excited that you're here to join us. We've prepared a really fascinating case study, which we'll get into shortly. But just thanks again for being here. So before we jump in, I wanted to just share a quick word about Alpha Fellowship and our product management course. So Alpha Fellowship teaches high demand skills, mainly that students and young professionals really want to learn and that companies want to hire for, but that are often not really well covered, either in undergraduate or even graduate programs. And certainly that's the case for product management, having spoken with a lot of folks trying to get into the field and product managers, both junior and pretty senior, who've shared those experiences. So with this course, we're really trying to offer something special to help aspiring product managers differentiate themselves and level up. So we offer intensive live instruction. Our instructors are really world class, and you'll meet one of them here in a moment. They all have over 10 years of work experience in their fields, and they really take an approach that's more like training than teaching. So imagine the first month or two on the job and how you would get upskilled really rapidly in that environment. That's how we teach. For our product management course specifically, we have a really fantastic instructor in Jeff Bordogna, who's going to lead the workshop this evening. He has really deep expertise in product management and engineering, and he's built products across multiple industries and companies. And he's just a really great guy to learn from. Finally, just a word about our product management course and what makes it different. I think the most important thing is that we teach the mindset of the product manager as much as the skill set. And that's really critical because you can learn the skills a variety of ways, free or paying for a course, but really understanding the mindset and the situational awareness you need to be a product manager is what matters in an interview. It's what matters on the job. It's the critical differentiator, and it's the focus of our course. So that's Alpha Fellowship in Product Management. Just a quick word about the agenda this evening. We're going to share a real brief survey just to get an idea of who our audience is and what brought you here, what interested you. Then we'll jump right into the case study from Jeff. Just for context, he was the VP of Product and Engineering at Relay Foods. He'll share more about that. And he advises startups and growth stage companies and helping them build their products now. And then we'll hear case reactions and kind of reflections, plus career tips from Morgan Kelly, who is a senior product manager currently at StubHub, and also has helped us both with our course curriculum, and she and her company StubHub are sponsoring a group project for the course. So some of the students will actually do a project for StubHub. And then we'll close out with Q&A. So with that, we'll just take a minute here. We want to share this survey. It's 3 questions, should take maybe a minute at most. Thanks all for sharing here. And we'll actually present the results so you have an idea of who you are in the audience. All right, hopefully getting into the second or third question, we'll give it maybe another 20 seconds and then share the results with folks so we can all just get an idea of who's on the call today. All right, great. Hopefully that gives everyone enough time. We'll go ahead and share the results now with everyone. That should be coming up here in just a second. There we go. We'll blame Zoom for the delay. That's always the thing to do. My colleague, my partner Bobby was saying I clicked it. I don't know what happened, so we'll blame Zoom. All right. So I gathered from the folks who signed up that we'd have a pretty diverse crowd. I want to actually just read down this and kind of share some reactions. So where are you currently in your career? Pretty healthy mix of folks trying to get into product management, switching careers, some currently in product management and working in another field. Great. Well, certainly for those who are trying to get into product management, either as a first job or switching, this should be really interesting for you and everyone else as well. But this is definitely targeting those folks. Why did you decide to join our product management workshop? To learn more about how product management works. That's great. You will definitely get a lot of knowledge in a short amount of time from Jeff. You'll know really what product managers do and what keeps them up at night, what makes them tick. So some interest definitely in how product management impacts lifetime value. That's great. We'll get into that. And then with respect to product management, what interests you most? So looks like there's a lot of interest in the first two, refreshing understanding of how it can drive customer experience, the core skills and tools. I will touch on those. Certainly diving deeper in those is more in the course, but you'll get an idea of some of the things we get into. And then understanding how to network with companies. That's great. That's hard. And we've definitely heard that from students. And I'm sure even Morgan and Jeff can share sort of their experiences on kind of breaking in and into the field and networking. So I don't want to take too much airtime. A lot of great folks on the call. If you're a student, career switcher, current professional, you're all in the right place. You'll learn something. I would say for folks who are professionals and maybe already in the product management field, definitely consider this experience and this course as an option for folks who are trying to level up, because we'd love to share it with them. So I'm going to hand over the mic now to Jeff and let him take it away. Thanks, Jeff.
No problem. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, hear you great.
All right, cool. All right, everybody, let me just pull up in my little slide deck thing here. And let's see, present. All right. So I'm not gonna, thanks for the intro there, Matt. It's nice to kind of quasi meet you all, I guess. I'm not gonna spend much time talking about myself here. I will say that, like probably many of you, I'm a little low on sleep and focus right now, so bear with me for that reason. But I'm excited to talk about this, and I hope, so I've got 3 goals for this session here. So one is, you find it just interesting. I think it's an interesting story, and hopefully serves as a distraction for everything else going on in the world right now. And then 2, as Matt said, I hope you learn something, even if you've been doing this for a while. And then 3, I hope you learn a little bit more about kind of how we go about things in Alpha Fellowship and what you might learn more if you were to join the course. I'll start out by asking this question, and I mean, it's rhetorically because we're not doing a back and forth here, but the reason why I ask it is I think it highlights how hard product management is, because if you ask a whole bunch of different folks who do this for a living, you'll get a whole bunch of different answers. And some of that's because the field itself is relatively new and fast growing. Some of it's also because it's highly contextual. So whether you're at a big company, small company, product-led company, there's whatever domain you might be in, there's a whole bunch of different ways PMing looks like, product management looks like. And so one of the things we do in the course is actually have a bunch of guest lecturers come in and talk about their experiences, so you get that multifaceted view on how it could be different in different environments. Regardless of what you actually do, one of the core things that a lot of and I think like we'll talk about this later in the talk, but one of the core things that hiring managers look for is what is often called a product mindset. So it's less about specific skills, and it's actually more about characteristics that you can build up over time, that regardless of the scenario that you're in, these kind of characteristics will help you be a better product manager. So the skills are important, but as Matt said earlier, so are these characteristics, and that's a lot of what we're going to focus on in the course. In order to kind of talk through some of how this manifests itself when you're doing product management, I thought I'd share a little bit of a quote here. I promise this is as close to politics that I'll get in this talk by mentioning the word press secretary. But this quote's by Seth Godin, who's a renowned marketing thought leader. And basically this idea that human beings, we all are walking around as press secretaries where we've got this narrative that we have in our mind for how our world works and how we relate to it. And we're constantly trying to find rationale to substantiate that narrative. So I think this is important for a whole bunch of reasons in the world. But from a product management perspective, the reason why this was a really key insight for me is hearing this is that regardless of what you do in product management, one of the key things to practice is thinking like a storyteller, understanding the motivations that go into all the different people that you interact with in your job. So the obvious one is customers, because clearly you want to learn more about what their skills are, or sorry, what their lives look like, what are their pain points, how do they relate to different products in the space, et cetera. So that's an obvious one, both the things that they tell you, but also the things that maybe they don't tell you, right? And the ways they act. But beyond customers, like it's also super important to think about the motivations and the stories of the people in your organization. So what is the CEO telling themselves? Like what story are they telling themselves? What story are they telling the investors? How do motivations and stories look different amidst the different departments of the company, marketing, product, operations, finance? The more, whatever level you're at in terms of product, the more you're able to actually understand, empathize with the different folks around you and their stories, the better you're going to be able to get things done with those people. And this especially is true as you get more senior in product, because your job is to actually tell a product story and get people to buy into that. And so this is one of the core things I tell people that is, I don't think it's enough attention in terms of a skill set, but is really important. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the problem with storytelling and being a press secretary is that we constantly are looking for things to support our worldview. And so that's something called confirmation bias in psychology, where we're always looking for the things that support our view. And so in order to combat this storytelling and narrative, we have to actually go act like a scientist. And what I mean by that is set a hypothesis for what we think, and then create an experiment that allows us to go test that. So ideally, if you're a really good scientist and product manager, you're looking for things that specifically refute that hypothesis, invalidate it. But regardless, finding concrete evidence one way or another, the combination of thinking like a storyteller and acting like a scientist, in my mind, are like core skills that go into that product mindset that I was talking about. And so I'm actually going to show you some of that with this case study that we're going to walk through here, where I use those skills and my team use those skills. And so I'm going to tell you about Relay Foods, which was a really interesting company that sadly no longer is around, but was in the online grocery space. And I could give you like a ton of different stories about Relay Foods, but I'm going to mainly focus on a little bit of context setting, and then going to just dive into the case part of it. So one second here. And so Relay Foods, one of the interesting things, the more you work in startups, the more you learn, is that companies and products change quite a bit over the course of their existence. And that was definitely the case with Relay. So we started out just basically saying, hey, we'll deliver anything to your door, not even food specific whatsoever. We then moved into food specific stuff. More like Instacart. So we'll go to these different grocery stores for you and bring them to your house. In retrospect, that probably was the better call for the direction that, given how successful they are these days. But we really found our niche in because we were in the Mid-Atlantic region in the US, and there's lots of great local farms and organic type mentality here. And so we wanted to be the Whole Foods market in terms of brand feel, in terms of focus, but with the convenience, both in terms of shopping, online shopping, plus delivery of Amazon. And so that's really what we're aiming for. Here's an image I dug up of just like our home screen at the time. Now, this is, I think, 6 or 7 years ago at this point, so it's been a little while. And the thing that was really neat was that we had seemed to really struck a chord around that time. So Net Promoter Score is basically a way of saying how much does a given user, how likely are they to recommend this product or service to a friend? Now, one of the things we'll talk about in the course is this particular score, this particular approach. There's debate in the product management community as to how much you should rely on this score. But generally, this, like, the higher the better. And this particular score is particularly high. And so we had struck upon something that people seem to really like. But we probably wouldn't be doing this case study if everything was like great. Like, there clearly was a problem. And so I want to talk now about how we address that problem. And so that problem, although we had lots of problems, it's hard being a startup generally, but our core problem was around retention, which is basically what percentage of people are we keeping around after the first order and that they continue to order with us? And you're probably looking at these numbers and saying, oh my gosh, that looks horrible. And I can tell you that, yes, it looks that way. Unfortunately, for product managers, these numbers aren't actually out of the ordinary in an e-commerce setting. Now, they should be a lot higher in a subscription setting, which is why a lot of companies are moving to subscription services. But for e-commerce, they're not terrible. Now, and that's partly because you may order like a TV every once in a while or a lawnmower or whatever it is. You don't need to buy every single week from most companies. The issue for us was that you kind of do with groceries. That's one of the few products out there that you actually do buy every week and buy a decent amount every week. And so the fact that we were having a whole bunch of people trying us, but not sticking around was clearly a problem, because they clearly had to go buy food somewhere the next week. And they weren't doing that by and large at Relay. And so to kind of drive that home here with customer economics, for those first time customers, their average order size was about $60. So that's how much groceries they were buying in the first order from us. But it cost us upwards of $90 to actually acquire them, meaning that the advertising that went to try to get them to come in the door, the coupons that we gave, a whole bunch of other things around that was almost double the cost. So you can imagine that the more you are spending and having lots of folks not come around for a second order, the worse off that we were as a company. Now, that should make sense intuitively. What's interesting is that one of the things that you should learn early in your career is that every business and every industry has its own dynamics of how usage and of the product influences the business KPIs. So this is customer lifetime value, which is basically a projection of, for a given user, how many dollars do we think they're going to spend over the course of the next year, let's call it year here. So this number, even though we had most of the people at Relay not coming back for a second order, this is actually still fairly high. And the reason was, even if you only have a small percentage of people that are actually ordering past that first order, if they order every week for 52 weeks and they spend $100 plus on groceries every week, your average customer lifetime value number is going to be still not bad, even if the median is not great. And so this number actually wasn't that bad in the abstract for us. The challenge was that our business was super expensive to run. And so we had warehouses and inventory and trucks going around delivering to people. And so even though this was a decently high number in some respects, it wasn't high enough for us to have a sustainable business. And so we really had to go target, how do we get this new customer CLV number higher? And the core part of the problem here seemed to be, we had a lot of people saying that, hey, I love this thing. Other people, you should try this out. Why were they doing that? But at the same time, most of them not continuing to use it themselves. And so this is where that kind of think like a storyteller element comes in, which is to say that really trying to put yourself into those shoes and understand how that could be the case. And so we went and talked to customers and tried to gauge what was going on. And one of the key things that we learned was that the set of problems around grocery shopping isn't just the convenience of delivery. It was about how do I go about figuring out what to make in a given week in terms of recipes, in terms of health, in terms of how to make something that's easy to cook. And so the problem was actually this broader mental energy around the full grocery life cycle, not just the convenience of online. And what would happen is that they would have their first order with us, they would like it, but it wouldn't solve their problem well enough where it would keep them from going back to their normal routine of grocery shopping at the grocery store each week. So we coupled that story kind of telling element with this acting like a scientist piece, which is to say that we crafted a hypothesis. So we said, by incorporating more elements of the full grocery life cycle, we think that these new customers will become more sticky because we're solving their problem that much better. And thus that new customer lifetime value number that I showed you before should be higher, and the retention number should be higher as a result. So this is what we did. We created a low-cost experiment. One of the things that I think is hard to recognize if you're not working in product and organization is how hard it is to get prioritization for an idea that you have. Even if it's a great idea, customers say they want it, there's lots of great ideas in companies, and there's lots of people with opinions. And so oftentimes you can't just have an idea that seems cool. You actually have to go prove it somehow concretely first before you go get the prioritization around some big project around for it. So for us, what we did was we did a lot of manual work to create blog post articles that had a bunch of links already built into it around meal planning and constructing an order. And our goal was to drive traffic to that in order to see whether or not people were going to engage with this content, which was very heavily meal planning and cooking focused, more than people who weren't coming in through that way. And lo and behold, even though we didn't have great instrumentation from an analytics perspective, we did see some concrete evidence that, hey, there's something here. This seems to be working. And so we took that, so the quantitative evidence, and we combined that with the qualitative evidence. So we actually got some testimonials from customers who engaged with those blog posts. Again, we haven't done any engineering time yet here. All we've done is some good content and some like manual work around making connections and things like that. And so we were able to bring that to the leadership team and say, hey, we have a good idea and we have some evidence that this thing might work. So can we get more funding and time to go work on a bigger project to showcase that? And lo and behold, we did. And that was exciting. And so this process, like this little mini project in order to go get the prioritization was something that I think is worth thinking about in any setting that you're in a product management context. Is there anything I can do without a whole bunch of engineering or otherwise time in order to showcase that there's something here in order to get that prioritization? So enter the meal planning project. So, so basically, this was our project to go solve that problem that we talked about before. And I'm gonna give you the blow-by-blow in terms of how this went. But I certainly could, but I'm just going to focus primarily on the lessons learned, like in terms of what went well, and then also the lessons learned in terms of what I think stunted further growth. So one thing we did well is we did this act of product discovery, which is basically just a way of saying we did research. So we talked to customers, we put together alternatives of how we could approach the problem, we prioritized work. We didn't just jump into solving the problem, which honestly I see a ton in my consulting work. And so the fact that we actually stopped and thought hard and did work before doing the work was really important. And so there's a whole bunch of different frameworks for doing product discovery. Here are some right here. We talk about in the class which ones and why, but honestly, the bigger deal is that you just do it somehow. And partly because it helps you collate all this disparate information of what you might do and why into a strategic decision-making framework. But then two, it also just stops you from skipping steps as often. And both of those things are really important. And so this is something that all too often gets skipped and definitely shouldn't. The other thing we did, which is part of that, was we talked to our customers, which seems like a pretty novel thing. Shouldn't be such a novel thing, I should say. And so there are two types of, or there's probably more, but there's at least two types of ways to talk to customers in terms of what you're hoping to learn. One's attitudinal, which basically is like, hey, tell me about like your problems, tell me like about your workflows, tell me about your feelings. Just give me a general sense of what the problem is, and so that you as the product manager can better understand what's going on. You do that first before you put something in front of them and say, hey, I want you to react to this. Because you want to understand in the abstract first what their problem is before like you skew their reaction with something specific. So, but then you put something specific in front of them and let them play with it. So it's pricing, it could be a UI, it could be a whole sorts of things. But by actually seeing them use something concrete tells you a whole heck of a lot more about how they react to whatever thing you go build ultimately. Related to that is that we prototyped before we built. So this is a tool called, a wireframing tool called Balsamic. There's a whole bunch of great other tools out there that allow you to do the same thing or similar things like Figma or Sketch or some other things, but InVision being another one. But the general idea is that it's relatively easy to create these views that get at the concrete elements of what you're building and allow people to react to it without having to have built stuff already, which is very expensive and time consuming. This thing also is something that you would think wouldn't be so novel, but unfortunately is not the norm in a lot of companies that I've been a part of, which is that the typical way in which projects get done is like one team starts with it and hands it off to another team, which hands it off to another team, and you kind of this back and forth, and you end up with a delay, lots of delays, and kind of a mess at the end. And by actually having these teams move together on this project, allowed us to create a much more cohesive whole at the end of it, and also to actually launch it on time. Again, this is something that shouldn't be a surprise for many of you out there, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute. But the act of releasing something iteratively allows you to maximize your learning. So you release something, you learn from it. You release something else, you learn from it. A lot of companies do a bunch of work and then release it at the end and kind of hope it all worked out. And most of the time, it unfortunately does not. And so these are some of the things, again, while not like brilliant insights, are really important. And we're going to dig into that, like the nuances of that, like in the course of what exactly goes into each of these things. But all these things get skipped so often, and it's unfortunate because they have a huge impact on the success of projects. So this is a chart that kind of gets at some of that sort of iterative rollout, and this is a growing, a popular sort of approach to how to release things these days, which is on the y-axis is the percent of customers who have access to the feature at a given time. So you can see that in the beginning, when you're just researching and building, very few people have access to this new feature that you're building. And then you slowly broaden the list of people who have access to it as you iterate and get more confidence in what you're building and that it's the right thing. So that at the end, when you release it to the rest of the public, it's not this giant lever that you're pulling and being like, well, I hope this works. And it's much more of a, hey, we already have a pretty good sense that this thing is going to work. And now we're just giving access to a broader set of users. And so, one second. And so at the end of that process, in that launch in March of 2015, so again, this is a while back, we landed with something we called meal planning. And there's a whole bunch I could tell you about the solution of meal planning. This blog post I reference here actually goes through more of that if you're interested. But the crux of it was that we landed on a solution that actually took customer workflows into account. A lot of online grocery stores just throw recipes up onto a page and just kind of hope it works out. Whereas we actually incorporated a lot of interesting elements. So for example, you, as a family, you could set what your number of people in your family, you could set your diet, your allergens. You could, one neat thing we did was the recipes we recommended to you actually took into account what you already had in your order. So if you already had eggs in your order, we would recommend you recipes that used up those eggs. And there are lots of things that we did, and we were really proud of what we launched at the time. But it was because we actually went through that product discovery step and didn't just try throwing something up there that we thought might work but weren't sure about. So this is the part where I'm supposed to tell you that we doubled our CLV because of this amazing solution that we came up with. But the story isn't so simple. We actually didn't know when we launched it what the result was. And what I mean by that is that we hadn't set up the analytics instrumentation or to be able to confidently say, how has behavior changed as a result of this? We were so focused on just the building that we had left off the measuring. And so we got to this point of launching it, which we were excited about. People were giving us great feedback, but we couldn't tell like the leadership team or others what actually that looked like quantitatively. And so this is the biggest learning that I had at Relay Foods, which is that a lot of times when you're in that mode of just building, you leave the instrumentation and the analysis side of stuff till the end, because you'll get back to that because it doesn't seem as important. When in the reality is having a shared semblance of what success looks like. Hey, what is this going to be? If we hit X, is that going to be good? If we hit Y, is that going to be good? And then being able to choose the metrics and build them into the product usage is critical for like actually understanding what just happened and how do you move forward from that. And the part of the reason why that's so important is most companies work this way, which is that they have a roadmap or a Gantt chart or whatever that says, oh, looks like meal planning's done, time to go work on X, Y, and Z now. And so we were at the tail end of this meal planning bar here, and we were saying, hey, there looks like this is something really exciting. We really just need some time to go instrument it and iterate on it a little bit more. And but there were all these people around us who were saying, but we already said we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And so we didn't have the bandwidth to go back and do those things that we should have done. And so the second lesson I learned, which is like comes out of that, is that companies have to have some sort of framework for adapting. All too often, companies get this really rigid sense of how the world is going to look like going forward, and so they create these beautiful Gantt charts. And so what happens is that when you get some information, hey, this thing launched and this is how it's doing, there's this real hesitancy to changing anything with the plans that you had already set out. And so if you have a framework as a company or as a product team for saying, hey, this is when we fold, this is when we call and keep going, this is when we really double down on it, it allows you to take in that new information and say, oh, wow, there's something really here. I know we thought this other thing was going to be important, but this seems like the most important thing right now. And again, this is something that in a product management setting, being able to have this conversation is critical to being able to adapt. And relatedly, the third lesson that I'd share here is I and other people around me were so heads down on like just building this thing that we failed to take into account that kind of storytelling element, the motivations of the people around us. Because a lot of the folks in the rest of the organization, not that there was nefarious or anything like that, but they were waiting for projects X, Y, and Z. And those were going to be the things that helped them build their metrics or the things that they thought that the company needed. And so if I had done a better job in my product role of saying, hey, how are you thinking about things, and really staying in touch with people and their stories, I would have been able to better come up with a solution for how we were going to meld together the competing priorities when the time came. And so that's something that I learned at the time and I've been able to take with me since then. It's also an indicator of why experience is so important in product management, is just because this is really hard to, in the abstract, learn. And so this is something we'll talk about in the class with like a really heavy training component. How do you do some of these things? So fast forward, I'm not gonna sort of ignore the CLV thing, which is, it wasn't a clickbait to get you to come to this session. So fast forward 4 months later, we had finally got it like through some of that backlog. We had finally done some instrumentation on the analytics side. We had finally put some time into having analysts put together a report. And lo and behold, the results were pretty awesome. And I'm going to get to new customers in a second, which is the focus here. But basically, for existing customers, their numbers went up as well. And this is an opt-in feature not something that were forced upon them. And a lot of them tried it, and a lot of them changed their behavior as a result of that. Then lapsed customers, so these are customers that we had a while ago, but we haven't seen them in a while. They also came back a lot more frequently than we were used to seeing, or a lot more of them than we were used to seeing, and their numbers went up as well, including this key one, which is that about a third of them stayed active after coming back, which folks in marketing will tell you, like with win backs, is not all that's not altogether that's not very usual. Usually you win back somebody by giving them a coupon and then they go and leave again. But the best findings were for new customers, which has been the focus of this chat, which is that we had the customers who are coming in for this through this new meal planning feature versus the customers that weren't. The customers that were ordering having significantly higher orders, both in that first order and beyond. And this key thing around retention, they were sticking around a lot more often, both of which are huge, right? So if you order more and you stick around more, that together is what gets us to the 2x number. That's one of the reasons why y'all are joining. And so this is where having that storytelling, hypothesis setting around what we thought was going to happen and what we needed to do. This is a clear example of it wasn't just the product team, but it was very much product led in terms of doing the product discovery and the product execution of how do we better solve this problem for customers by giving them a broader solution to their grocery problem. So we were super jazzed at the time, and I really, really, really wish that the story ended differently, because we had it. We were like, oh, this is the answer. We just have to go do and invest more into that. Unfortunately, the cliche is so true, which is timing is everything. So by that time, we were running out of money as a company because it was so expensive. And we ended up getting stuck in this whirlwind of fundraising, mergers and acquisitions. A lot of the focus, both specifically of the leadership team who was and the product team who were doing prioritization type work, but also the whole company of really trying to focus on what we were doing from a fundraising perspective and not what we were doing from a product perspective. And so in retrospect, if we had better instrumentation of how well this thing was actually working out of the gate, and we didn't have to wait 4 months to get that information, we would have had 4 more months of been able to double down and add more and been that much stronger going into a fundraising round. So lo and behold, we actually got acquired by another company called Door-to-Door Organics in May of 2016. And generally, I think, hey, it was an exit. People, so that part of it was exciting. It wasn't the exit that we had hoped for, but it was an exit. What we did from May 2016 forward is that we worked on incorporating a lot of these elements that I just showed into the Door-to-Door Organics platform. And the neat thing was that through a lot of hard work, both from the Relay folks coming aboard, but also from really awesome folks that were already at Door-to-Door Organics, we were starting to see a lot of the same engagement and exciting numbers, just as timing is everything one more time it came along. Remember that deck that the slide I showed you earlier where we were aiming to be Whole Foods plus Amazon? Well, turns out that just around this time, Amazon bought Whole Foods. And so Amazon became the Amazon plus Whole Foods. And even though we had an amazing product, people were excited, the fundraising in that space just froze up entirely because everyone was fearful of what that meant. And so no one wanted to spend investor dollars until they understood better what was going to happen with that acquisition. So really unfortunate timing for us because that was the end of our chapter. And so it tells you, even though you can have an amazing product and we had really good marketing and all sorts of other things, it's not just about that. It's about a broader set of things in the market. The silver lining here is actually that even though the company no longer exists, it did sell the product and technology assets, and that's actually being used in a number of different places in the world right now, which is kind of neat. It's definitely not the original way we had envisioned it, but it's still a much better chapter, a much better ending than it entirely going away. So that's my story of product-led product-led CLV impact. So I hope you enjoyed it. It was a little bit of a whirlwind there, but I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to introduce Morgan here, Morgan Kelly, who is a senior product manager at StubHub. As Matt said at the very beginning, she and StubHub are sponsoring a project as part of Alpha Fellowship with the students. So they're going to be able to work on something really concrete. So she's going to talk a little bit about that, a little bit about her reaction to these slides, and a little bit about tips for aspiring product managers out there. And then I'll circle back in a Q&A at the end here to talk a little bit more as well. So thank you all for listening. And Morgan, the floor is yours.
Hey, can you guys hear me all right? Yes.
Yep, definitely.
Cool. So I apologize ahead of time. I have a 7-week-old puppy in my lap, and she was sleeping and now she's awake. So if she makes noise, I apologize for her. So thanks for sharing that case, Jeff. That was really interesting to hear about it from your perspective. What I really liked that you did was you started with data and you ended with data. And you talked about how like the pitfall of what you guys did was that you didn't have the data to end the story in the beginning. So that was really interesting. And I too have fallen into that trap of like, let's just get it done and get it out, and then we'll measure it later. And have seen the pitfalls of that as well. So I think that's definitely a key learning that everyone should keep in mind. The other thing that I really liked about the case was the emphasis on the user research. It's really easy for companies to, take feedback or people calling in from customer service and listen to what those people are saying, but you really get those key insights from those ethnographic interviews, or like, asking people about their motivations and their mindset while they're going through something, and then seeing what their pain points actually are in order to better solve those. So that was very, very interesting. Thank you. And we can go to the next slide. I can talk about tips for aspiring product managers. So I, out of business school, switched into product management. So I'm very familiar with, how you sort of tell a story about yourself in a way that shows your value as a product manager. So I have some tips that people could keep in mind. So first is actually tailor your story. Like think like a storyteller as a product manager, but think about yourself as the product here. Think about the hiring manager as having, a pain point that they need to solve, and you fit into that. You are that solution. So instead of like, oh, I really want to be a product manager here, say like, I have this skill set, I've come from this industry and I've solved this problem, and I really think I'd be an asset. Next one. The main thing for me when I'm interviewing product managers or aspiring product managers is their ability to show or demonstrate customer empathy throughout either their education or their career. So this is really hard to teach, and it's a very key skill of a product manager. Your customer can be internal, external, you name it. So how can you frame something that you've done throughout your career or in school or just side project to show that you were thinking about it from a customer point of view? The example that I have for my career is I didn't have a product management role at the time. I actually was redoing the global onboarding program for a energy efficiency company, and no one had done it from the new hire perspective. So I put myself in the customer's shoes, which was the new hire, and I was like, okay, what information would I want to hear first? What makes the most sense to learn about the company, instead of just from the company's perspective, what do we want to make sure the new hires know? And that was successful, and I measured it and all of those good things. So I was able to talk to that and talk about that in interviews, and be able to show that I could be a good product manager with the chance. Next one. And then lastly, obviously, practice makes perfect. Think about, as you're going through your own life, think about things that you like about products that you use every day. Think about things that you don't like. Something to pay attention to is when you have an emotion about a product or about something you're doing, either annoyance or surprise. That's really a time when you want to focus in on what you're surprised about, what you're annoyed about, how you would fix it, or maybe what decision was made to create that. And if that annoyance was on purpose, maybe what the product manager might have been thinking when they created that product or that situation for you. And I will hand it back to Jeff for the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Morgan. That was great. Matt, I don't know if you want to be facilitating this.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So there's a Q&A icon at the bottom, folks. So please ask questions. There are, even simple ones are probably on the minds of other folks on the call, and everyone will learn from those. So actually, Deepti had two questions. First, how did you go about collecting the data and about the factors that eroded stickiness in your product, and how did you process it?
Cool.
I can ask that again if you'd like, Jeff. I know you're multitasking.
Oh yeah, no, I'm just pulling it up now so I can make sure to read it as well. So,
Super.
so how did you go about collecting the data about the factors that eroded stickiness? Okay, great. So I think part of the context for this case is that this was 2015, and so the state of analytics was very different. It looked very different then. And so for us, part of the challenge of actually being ready to measure was that we didn't have a lot of great pre-built solutions for doing so. And so one of the things that I recommend to folks now is there's a ton of great SaaS tools that are available to do some of this engagement measurement. So Amplitude, Full Story, I'm trying to think of some other ones off the cuff here. But like start with the Heap Analytics is another really good one, Mixpanel. So but these tools have been created specifically around measuring engagement, and they're fairly easy to set up in terms of getting them connected into your product. And so I would have used, or we would have used those at the time if we had those available. We had to kind of create our homegrown version. But those tools both allow you to see kind of the engagement happening, and then do a whole bunch of slicing and dicing on those metrics after the fact. One of the things I'll add to that, though, is that regardless of what you use, even if the tool makes it easier, like say an Amplitude, one of the challenges of doing this work regardless is the definitions around measurement. So like, what does it actually mean for someone to order a second time? When is that by? Like, are you using 8 weeks or are you using 4 weeks? Is your customer lifetime value a year-long time frame or shorter? There's a lot of questions around definitions, and making sure you're very tight on how you measure and then connect that to how you're defining. And so the defining part is actually not so much a technical problem as it is a human problem of getting on the same page about things. Morgan, I don't know if there's anything you would want to add to that question.
No, I think you covered it.
Cool. And then, so this actually the second one here might get to the same one. So I mentioned some of the, I mentioned some of the tools here that we used. And again, what I'll do is I'll just double down a little bit just to say that going back to, it wasn't just that we hadn't instrumented it, which those tools help with that I just described. And it was also that we hadn't done the work ahead of time of setting expectations around what success looked like. So like when you say to measure the outcomes of the changes, like that, we didn't actually even say, hey, we think that the outcome is going to be like success would look like X, failure will look like Y, these ranges of things in between. We hadn't done that. And so when we started seeing some successes, the ones that we could at least measure, like then there was different expectations around the table as to say, how good was that? And is that worth doubling down on or not? We hadn't done that ahead of time. And so, so when you're specifying at the beginning of the project, what are the outcomes that we hope to see? It allows you to better instrument the product to measure that engagement, and allows you to better evaluate at the end to say, how well did it go given what we were expecting to see? Matt,
Great. Yeah, thanks. I'm going to just go ahead and jump in with this next question here,
sure.
if this is helpful. So I'm currently working at an education startup, all part-time employees. We have difficulty managing the workflow and have tons of dead ends all the time. Sounds familiar. And we are having a hard time communicating among departments also. been there. Would you give us some suggestions on this problem? We tried Trello, but it turned out no one used it anymore. It's interesting about Trello. I've used it. I'd like to, yeah, I'm actually curious where well, we could follow up to almost a question there, but I'll hand it over to you, Jeff. It's interesting that Trello didn't get traction.
Yeah, so this is a great question. One of the things that I see a lot in my consulting practice is folks thinking they have a product problem, and what they actually have is a lack of alignment between departments and people in terms of what the problem actually is. And so we actually spend a lot of time focusing on alignment and communication in goal setting. And so so that's like, to answer your question, there is tooling, and I'm happy to share some things in a second here in terms of ideas around that help with that problem. But a lot of times what I see is not having shared goals is actually the underlying problem at hand. So does everyone actually agree on what you're trying to achieve, and in the medium to long term? And then also, what are the short-term goals that you all think that you need to do to get there? This happens a lot in companies that have different departments, because different departments tend to have different goals. So, but that's something that you can do, is actually talk across departments and say, hey, where do we have common ground here, and where are we, like, so that we can work on less things better together. And so you, like, ideally are both setting those goals cross-departmentally and then also working towards those goals together cross-departmentally. So whatever tool that you use, like, if you can try to have projects or products or features or whatever the thing that you're trying to build, it like to be sort of one cohesive thing rather than strewn across a whole bunch of different Trello boards, depending on which department you're in, that tends to help, because you're consolidating progress on that feature you're working on, rather than not being able to keep track of it because it's all over the place across different departments' ways of managing information. What I'll say is that, going to specific tool recommendations here, so Trello is a great simple tool. It can sometimes fall short for this very reason in terms of complexity of organizations. I'll say there's a growing number of tools that are specifically oriented around product management. So AHA was the first company in the space to do this, where it's the tool actually talks about goals, not just work to be done, and it organizes that way. Product Board and ProdPad are two other tools in this space that I think are doing a really good job of reorienting how work is done to be more about the why and not just the what is happening this sprint. And then I'll say that there's also other tools that are kind of like Trello, but that just give you a little bit more control, makes it a little bit easier to manage than with Trello. So Asana, Monday, there's a couple other ones that are kind of similar, but are built a little bit more for an organization, rather than just the simplicity of Trello is amazing, but it sometimes falls short in bigger settings. Morgan, again, I'm gonna give you a chance to, if you want to kind of share anything along those lines.
Sure. Yeah, I have actually had success with using even something simpler, just like a Google Sheet. Depending how many priorities you do have, if you can stack rank them, like say you want revenue, and then you want customer lifetime value, and then you want NPS as your 3 metrics that you're shooting for, everything that you're working towards should be able to go back to one of those, and if you have them ranked, then you can decide what the priorities are, and everyone can be aligned, everyone can have access to that. And obviously, depending on resources, you might shift around a little bit, but I think that having something even simpler than Trello can sometimes be easier.
Yep, that's a really good call.
Nice. I think we have time for one more, and we'll make it brief because I wanted to share a couple closing words here. So basically, he's wondering, anonymous attendees say, I'm wondering, how do you evaluate customer interviews? So for instance, I'm currently working on a digital transformation project in the manufacturing industry. And while taking customer interviews, my team and I are coming to the conclusion that it might be the technical platform, our product, which is the problem. Customers say that they get confused when they have to place bulk orders, but they are happy placing orders for less than 5 products. Does this directly imply that the UI may be a problem, or perhaps there is a need to redesign the entire customer journey with our new digital product? All suggestions are welcome. That's a really good question. I'd like to share thoughts on that, having been in, but I won't. I'm not the one here. Go ahead. Yeah, it's a really good question. That's a true.
I'll let Morgan actually, if you want to answer this first. I'm happy to do it either way, but I feel like I've been talking more.
Sure. Yeah, I would ask here. So this is again a very good question. I think it's really important what your customers want to do. If they want to only place an order for less than 5 products, then you don't actually have a problem. If they want to place an order for more, but they're having trouble, then sure, you do have a problem that maybe you can solve technologically. And then I would take that into the second phase of like a usability interview, like show them that prototype that maybe you can make in Balsamiq or whatever, and ask them to use it and see where they get confused. So there's the ethnographic, like you're seeing that they're having issues. And then there's the, okay, does this solve it? Or do we maybe need to kick some tires somewhere else?
Yeah, that's great. And I'll add, just piggyback on that to say that one of the things that I've been seeing, just specifically the part around, is the UI the problem, or is it something else, or is it the broader customer journey? Something that I've seen be effective is both drawing a customer journey map, which is basically, here are all the steps that the customer is going through. And this gets to some of what Morgan's describing of like, what are they feeling at each step? What are they doing next? So mapping what they currently are going through, and then trying to come up with a, well, if we changed it, how would that change? And so you get a sense of where the gap is between like what the ideal journey is versus what the actual today journey is. And if the two journeys are actually pretty close together, then that likely means that the issue is actually on the UI itself. Like it's actually just an issue with the journey itself is fine, but the interaction at one of those steps along the journey is not good enough to facilitate that the journey going through the whole way. So all that to be said, Morgan's point is definitely right on, which is make sure you have a problem first, and what that problem is in the ethnographic sort of approach before diving into the UI or the customer journey piece itself.
Awesome, thanks, Jeff. I'm going to put my video back on now. So, folks, thanks again for making this, I think, a really interactive and fun experience, not only for the audience, but also I think Jeff and Morgan. The questions were excellent. So if you have more questions, you can submit them at admissions@alphafellowship.com. You can see the email address there. Like we realize we're building a relationship with a lot of you folks here, and part of that is being useful. That was the goal of this workshop, and letting you get to know us. We're real, we're experienced, we're very dedicated to high quality and relevance. Hopefully that's evident. Jeff, thanks for really putting a lot of thought into your talk and your case study. It's brave to share things that don't work out as you expected, and to be candid that way. Folks in the call, you'll learn, you probably already know, that learning from mistakes is the most valuable learning. So Jeff sharing those with you is basically learning gold. That it's something wonderful. And it's a privilege to be able to hear those from somebody who's lived through those experiences. It's very unique. I just want to close with the invitation to learn more about us. And if you are trying to get into product management, or either new to your career or trying to pivot into it, we recognize that there are a lot of options, both free and paid. But an Alpha Fellowship may be new to you, but this is an exceptional opportunity. It really is. The people behind this course, Jeff, Morgan, and a dozen plus folks who are coming from product management roles in companies like Walmart, Amazon, of course, StubHub, Zillow. I could go on. There's probably 4 or 5 other names are contributing to this curriculum. They're going to be present as guest speakers. And like the intention of this course is exactly as we've described it. It's to help you level up in the most meaningful way within a short time period, so that if you want to go get a job, as a product manager, as an associate product manager, to pursue an internship, all the above, like this is really a transformational opportunity. So reach out to us, apply on the website. We'd love to hear from you, share questions, and we hope to see some of you in the course. Just so you know on that, it starts the first week of December. The details are on the website. Follow us on LinkedIn. We'll be having more of these talks and sharing more, and hopefully getting to know a few of you soon. So thanks all for your time. Have a great evening.